the second section of materials that are in my resource center, which is probably more, are more extensive than the ones I've just described, but they are also materials that I've collected over my lifetime of work. And I decided to organize them according to the Articles of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Just after I left the Senate, I worked with the young person to unpack, as they say, the convention article by article, and we looked at everything that was covered in each of the articles of the convention, of which there are 54, I think, actually. As we did that, we realized that the Convention on the Rights of the Child is a very remarkable document, came out at a remarkable time, just after the end of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it was a time where they thought that human rights and other issues were going to be addressed with, it was a new spring, so to speak, after the end of the Cold War. And so I think that there are elements in the Convention on the Rights of the Child that might not actually be in there if we wrote it now. It was a particular moment in time and a particular group of people who put it together, including a strong Canadian contingent. And what it contains is a developmental and rights-based perspective on children and childhood. And we found almost nothing that we could not fit into the categories of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So we decided that this was the way, I decided this was the way to organize these materials, which continue to grow, but I now know exactly, which box they're going to go into, which article they most easily fit. These these materials are now on a database, and which is word searchable, so it's going to be easily for someone to come in and search and look for material related to something that they're interested in. And I'll just give you an idea of the kinds of things that you might find here. The articles that are, for me, the most interesting one is Article 12, which is the article that relates to the child's right to participate, child's right to have a place in decisions that are made about him or her. And so I have quite a large extension of both models of how to do this, of examples of when it's been done, of reports that kids themselves have done, and so on and so forth. So that's all within, I think, 8 or 9 boxes that are under Article 12. Much of these are there. Some of them are reports, some of them are specific, are booklets, or some of them are specific things that came from meetings that I took part in, but showed good examples of how to enable children to have their voices heard. A second article that's of considerable interest, and that when we've worked with kids in what we call shaking the movers here in our center, which is getting kids together to talk about articles of the convention. The articles on children's rights and education, so those are Articles 28 and 29. The second, Article 29, is particularly interesting because it talks about the aims of education. And the aims of education, according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, are much broader and more rights-oriented than one finds even in most school codes of conduct and so on. They're much more sensitive to the rights of children. Other articles, which of course coincided with the work, or I was able to fill up with work I'd already done and continue to do on issues such as child labor, issues of sexual exploitation of children, which has been an issue I've continued to be interested in since the Stockholm Conference, after which I and a young woman who was there with me on our delegation, who was a girl who'd had much too much experience in the sex trade for her own good, but who was very articulate. And she and I put together in 1998 a conference in Victoria in which we brought together 54 young people from the Americas who had been in the sex trade, and some of them still were, and enabled them, gave them voice, enabled them to speak out and to talk about what it was like, and to change the language so that Never again do you talk about juvenile prostitution. You talk about children exploited in the sex trade. So there's an article devoted to that with a lot of material in those boxes, reading both to that conference but to many conferences and the work. It's a continuing problem, as we all know, and we have to keep up on it, and in some ways just fight back at the forces that are continuing this, to me, totally unacceptable abuse of children's rights, probably the worst abuse that occurs. Of course, other articles relate to violence against children. Article 19 is about violence against children. I was involved with the program, the UN study on violence against children, whose leader, who's the man who organized, Professor Pinero, was shocked, as many of us were, at the vast extent of violence against children in the world, throughout the world. And his view was that all violence against children is unacceptable, and no violence against children is acceptable, and all violence is preventable, and that we have to work towards that dream with legislation and everything else possible. Other articles that we have in the collection, such as the articles on child labor, the articles on children in armed conflict, which is very extensive, related to a lot of the work I did with Lloyd Axworthy, for whom this was an important issue, as well as with General Romeo Dallaire, who is passionately interested in the issues of child soldiers and the problems of children in armed conflict. There are articles related to other abuses that one can, any abuse that you can imagine is covered by some article of the convention, because those are all rights violations, but they're also more positive. The rights to education, the rights to health. I have an extensive collection of materials related to child's right to health, best health possible. The rights to know more about their rights and to know more about their rights, and to all the processes that keep this going, because we have to report to the international community how well we're doing or not so well. We're about to report again. The next one is soon coming up, and I have collected all those reports that Canada's done, and the reporting, the observations that come back to us from the committee, and to some extent the failure of Canada to respond adequately to what we're being shown to have failed at in terms of promotion of children's rights. We rank rather lowly at this particular stage in terms of poverty, in developed countries, in terms of numbers of children living in poverty, failure to have access to the kinds of supports guaranteed in the convention, to working parents, to childcare, and so on. So that gives you just some idea of the kinds of issues that are and papers and documents that are in this particular collection. And I've had students that I've mentored here or I've supervised here who've been able to use these materials. One, for example, did a study of child marriage in the Niger, and I had adequate material for that, for her to find out how to frame it as a rights issue and how to look at the material and how to go after it. Another one did work on children in education for children in fragile states, with particular reference to Afghanistan. Another student worked on child labor and all the child labor standards that have been established throughout Canada, that is, in different provinces and so on. Interesting listing of what we do and what we don't do. And another one has worked on, is working now on child labor in the Americas and so on. So the opportunities are great for students who are looking for supervision or just looking for materials, and we are always here, and I'm often here myself to be able to share my own experience with these students and help them understand and find the materials they need, and why it's so important to look at everything with respect to children and young people from a rights-based perspective.